the mother of all talk shows. Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
Welcome to the special New Year's Eve edition of the mother of all talk shows. Slaughter, slaughter everywhere, and if you're in Gaza, not a drop to drink. We talk to some of the very best commentators on the entire media spectrum. People like Scott Ritter, Colonel Macgregor, Sarah Wilkinson, and the redoubtable Richard Medhurst. And you'll be seeing all of them again in this special edition. Stay tuned.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway. The mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway. The world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
A happy New Year's Eve, if there's such a thing in the year of 2025. I don't know about you, but I'm looking forward to a better 2026 than we had in 2025. It was one long, bloody war. And boy, do I mean bloody. And it's coming to an end amidst new war being waged in Venezuela. The aerial war will soon be succeeded by boots on the ground in Venezuela if Donald Trump's rhetoric is anything to go by. It's not going to end any better than all the other wars that we've been involved in. General Smedley Butler famously said, "War is a racket," and racket indeed it is, and it's perfectly circular. The people who make the most money off the wars give some of that as a kickback to the politicians who proselytize and manufacture consent for the very wars which are enriching the merchants of death. A perfect example in the last 12 months was provided by Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson inexplicably turned up in Kiev and scuppered the peace plan which had been initialed in Istanbul in the first few weeks of the war in the Ukraine. All of those dead people could still have been alive. All of that destruction, death and bloodshed could have been avoided. But Boris Johnson, inexplicably at the time, travelled to Kiev and convinced Zelensky that Britain and the countries of the coalition of the killing, the so-called Western countries, even though most of their populations are entirely against the policies of their government, they would back Zelensky if he carried on fighting. So the initial copies of the peace agreement at Istanbul were quietly shelved. And well over 1 million people, getting on for 2 million people, would still be alive today if he had not done that. So why did he do that? Well, we later learned in the course of 2025 that not only one of the main merchants of death in the Ukraine war gave Boris Johnson £1 million sterling, but that Boris Johnson took him on what was effectively a sales trip to Kiev so that he would get even more business in the war. And of course, as in everything, what happens in Britain on that scale happens in the United States on a far greater scale. It is undeniably true that the American political system is bought and paid for by special interests, and those special interests are often, perhaps mostly, to be found in the military-industrial complex, against which General Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander in World War II, warned us on his last day, his valedictory address on leaving office as President of the United States well over half a century ago. President Eisenhower was right. The overweening special interests in Washington and increasingly in London, and no doubt in Paris and Berlin too, are a particular, special, clear and present danger to the safety of the people and to the future of the world. It was a year which came to an end with the blood-curdling threats of Donald Trump towards Venezuela. Donald Rumsfeld, the George W. Bush Defense Secretary, famously said in the highly lampoonable address that he gave, when he said, "It's not our fault that God put America's oil under other people's countries." Donald Trump went one better. He didn't even recognize that it was under other people's countries. He thinks that God, who knows, gave America the right to take the land and the oil of people in other countries, and that they are not other people's countries. They belong to the United States at the whim and at the caprice of a here today, gone tomorrow President of the United States of America. We don't know how the Venezuelan situation will develop, but it bookends the disasters that occurred earlier in the year. We talked about some of them last week, particularly the incredible, almost George Lucas Star Wars type affair that was the 12-day war between Israel and Iran, begun by Israel and its sneak attack on Tehran and its denizens. But the war between Israel and Iran isn't over yet. It was only a round in the conflict which seems certain to be reignited in the course of 2026. It was an annus horribilis for millions, scores of millions, maybe hundreds of millions throughout the world. It was almost the end. It was almost Armageddon. And of course, it didn't end well for me and Gayatri either, when we were stopped by no less than 10 armed police officers of the anti-terrorism squad. I'm not making this up. This really happened at a London airport. Something happened to me. Maybe it broke my heart. It certainly gave me arrhythmia. I never had a day's illness, never missed work for one day in my entire life from the age of 14. But I now have a cardiologist. Amazing. The words "I have a cardiologist" were words I never thought that I would utter. I'm taking 10 tablets a day. I have to be very careful what I do, because any word spoken in anger might well be my last. But hey, what a way to go, speaking the truth to power. It ended with Gayatri and me in exile. It ended with Gayatri and me separated from our children, a situation, I'm glad to say, which has now been reversed. And we and our family will go on talking. If anyone's listening, stay tuned. It's the mother of all talk shows. I wonder if there's more to it, Anthony. She says not, but might she be preparing for a presidential run?
You very well may, but Americans don't like a quitter. So even if she was starting to speak some truth, we're not going to take that very well.
Fair point. Very, very fair point. But Donald Trump's political position looks to me now extremely isolated. He has destroyed a very considerable part of his most militant base. He hasn't just lost Marjorie Taylor Greene, he's lost Tucker Carlson, he's almost entirely lost Alex Jones, he has substantially lost the support of Steve Bannon, and many, many others are beginning to question his judgment, and some even to question his continuing fitness for office. So he's in a very weak position. But if he wanted to, he could take the bull by the horns on this Ukraine question. He could say, stop sabotaging me. Don't think by leaking things you're going to divert me. I'm serious. I'm ending this war, and I'm certainly going to end America's involvement in this war.
You
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
You're watching the special New Year's Eve edition of the mother of all talk shows, looking back at 2025 and praying, please God, for a better 2026. It was a very bad year for whistleblowers, for truth tellers. It was a very bad year for those who speak out against the prevailing orthodoxy, which as long ago as Dr. Samuel Johnson was recognised as the grimmest dictatorship of them all. One of the bravest of the British, one of the clearest of the whistleblowers, was my compatriot Richard Medhurst, who spent the year, almost all of it, on bail, having been arrested at a London airport. Sound familiar? And charged, no, we haven't been charged, but he was, charged with terrorism, charged with being a member of the Islamic resistance in Palestine, Hamas. This is a man that wears a cross around his neck. This is a man who is a choir boy. I don't know, maybe even literally he was a choir boy. This is a man whose parents are Nobel Peace Prize winners, diplomats with the United Nations. How he ended up living in Vienna. This is a man who's done no more than speak words, write words. The state may not like his words, but how does words become terrorism? This devalues the entire concept, the entire idea, the entire word. Terrorism is debased, devalued, made ridiculous when you can call someone like Richard Medhurst a terrorist. He spent the whole year as a British journalist on bail for terrorism charges. Now, a happy update, but not entirely. In the last few days, Richard Medhurst has been cleared of all charges. The charges have been dropped. The bail has been discontinued. He's a free man in Britain. The bad news is he lives in Vienna. And the Austrian authorities, encouraged by the British authorities, have also charged him with terrorism, and the British have handed all the files onto the Austrians. What could possibly go wrong? The birthplace of Adolf Hitler, investigating a brave young British whistleblower and journalist, truth teller, on charges of terrorism. Let's talk with Richard Medhurst. Stay tuned.
Hi, George. It's good to be back on the program. Thanks for having me. Yes, so originally, I was following this whole prescription case from the beginning as it was taking place. I attended the court remotely, and I'll just say one thing before I get into today's outcome is that they had the Lord, or I should say Lady Chief Justice, and two other judges who just so happened to be ready to take the appeal immediately after. So this is already late in the evening that day, which looked to me and looked to Craig, who was in the court and feeding me all this information as well from the sessions I couldn't attend, as a stitch-up. If we can put it that way, it will be that blunt. But yes, today is very important news, because a lot of people in the last couple of weeks we've been seeing all up and down the country, even in places like Truro, in Cornwall, coming out and holding up these placards, and in some cases people who just happen to have perhaps a kufiya on, being arrested under the very same provision that I was arrested under, this Section 12 of 12(1)(a), where it's basically giving an opinion that can be considered supportive of a prescribed organization. And again, I should point out, this is the first direct action, the first protest group to be ever placed on this list, and it is very significant. And so you've had groups like Defend Our Jurors that have been also campaigning to have people come out every weekend and hold up placards and basically engage in what is just civil disobedience and a peaceful protest to have this prescription lifted. Now, what the decision today means is that there's going to be, so Palestine Action, specifically Huda Amori, they've won permission to go ahead with this judicial review, and that means that they're going to go challenge the government decision at the High Court. And I don't have the dates yet, but I can tell you that it's going to be in November. It's going to happen across the span of a few days, and I'll hopefully be covering it in the court. And, this is obviously a massive blow to not just Yvette Cooper, but also to Keir Starmer, on whose behest she is acting. And this is something that might take a couple of years. And just to be very clear that until that group is lifted, until the judicial review goes through, and if it's successful for Palestine Action, it will still be considered an offence to display any form of support. But again, we're reaching levels that are so ridiculous now that people who just happen to have the word Palestine maybe or wearing a kufi have been arrested and accused. This is both in England and Scotland of supporting a terrorist organisation, and they're basically going wild with this and arresting people just for the slightest transgression. And this again strikes at the core of free speech and the right to protest. We have to be very clear about that. And this is the danger that I was pointing to when I got arrested. That if you don't have the right to speak freely, you can't have a free press, and if you don't have the right to protest, well, you can't have a free society. So, all of these cases are somehow related in the sense not just that they talk about Palestine, but that they're really going after our fundamental rights in the UK.
For sure, and I've no doubt that we'll have to talk again about that. Even Donald Trump was able to shame the British Prime Minister yesterday on the issue of freedom of speech. Starmer had no reply that he could credibly give to the charge that Britain, a country that I was born into a long time before you, and our whole shtick was that we were a free society. It was the communists over there that did censorship and tyranny. We were the free world, and one of our characteristics was we had the right to protest, strike, speak, write, do whatever we wanted to do to make our true and genuine beliefs known. And you've only got to adumbrate that which we had and compare it with what the situation is now to realize how far we've fallen. But let's move on because there's so much to discuss. Is there going to be a ceasefire in Gaza or not? Is there going to be British and French recognition of a Palestinian state or not? And what would that in any case mean if it were to happen? Your views, please.
Well, George, I have to be honest, I don't take, I don't put much stock into the words of Keir Starmer on any subject, and this idea that he's going to use Palestinian self-determination, which again is an inalienable right, as some sort of bargaining chip, is frankly insulting. And what is the message here? I mean, he's basically trying to use that to threaten the Israelis. Well, let's say, for example, that they actually comply with what he's asking them to do, which is ridiculous because he's on the same side. But let's imagine for a second that they do stop the violence, whatever that means. What does that mean? He's going to continue denying Palestinians recognition for their state, and I mean, again, I shouldn't have to point out the fact that the UK is very, very much responsible for this whole situation in the first place, with Balfour and Sykes-Picot and all the subsequent aid and diplomatic cover and weapons that we've been giving the Israelis for decades and decades and decades. So it's extraordinarily insulting, and he's acting like he's doing Palestinians a favor when during his entire tenure he's been providing them with intelligence, with these Royal Air Force flights from taking off from Cyprus. And of course, it's not that he started it, but he continued where Sunak left off. He continued to provide them with weapons, with parts for their F-35 jets. And then he used terrorism laws against me and against other journalists and against activists and prescribed a direct action group that was dismantling the Israeli supply chain. And now he acts like he's doing Palestine a favor. You'll remember, George, there was this interview, I think it was on LBC, that Keir Starmer did, where he went on the air and he explicitly said that Israel has the right to cut off water and electricity. I mean, you don't have to be a human rights lawyer to know that that's a war crime, but he is a human rights lawyer, so he certainly knows better. And I don't think he's ever retracted those comments or apologized for them in any capacity. No. So he's done everything in his power to again, not just rhetorically, but also in terms of material conditions, kill Palestinians to make them suffer. So honestly, even if tomorrow morning he recognized the Palestinian state, I'm not really quite sure that that would absolve him of what he's done. And I don't think there's going to be a ceasefire. I think that all of these, it's not just Keir Starmer, but all of these leaders that are coming out now and pretending like this, they're suddenly shocked about Gaza. I think they're just running cover for the Israelis. It's kind of like putting a band-aid or a plaster on a gunshot wound and acting like, oh yeah, we see the violence, don't worry, we're going to do something about it. But they're really just buying time for the Israelis to keep killing. And some people have suggested, as a matter of fact, they might be done killing. That this is basically just they're wrapping up the end. I mean, frankly, I don't know what the death toll is right now. The Lancet say it's 400,000. Others say the Hamas-run health ministry, as the BBC say, will tell you it's 60,000. Does it really matter at the end of the day? A genocide is based on intent. And the land grabs are happening. The Israelis hold conferences and meetings about openly in public about stealing land in Gaza. So there's a multitude of crimes going on here that no ceasefire is going to solve.
Well, of course, it may be that they're done killing. Although listening to Ben-Gvir, who may very well end up, I mean, some people say he'll never be prime minister, but that's what they once said about Menachem Begin, the leader of the terror gang with the blood of British officials on his hand. They said it about Yitzhak Shamir, who personally murdered the United Nations envoy, the Swedish count. Shamir personally murdered him with his hand, and he became the prime minister. So Ben-Gvir could well become the prime minister. And from his point of view, there'll never be a done killing. There'll never be an end to this until every last Palestinian is extirpated from the land. But let me press you on the issue of recognition. What do they mean by that, Richard? I mean, Britain has supported the Oslo Agreement for 35 years. The United States provided the lawn on which the Oslo Agreement was signed. Every government in the West is already committed to a two-state solution, to the Oslo process, but it's endless process and no outcome, and deliberately so. So what is it that they would in fact be recognizing if they go ahead with that recognition?
Yeah, I mean, that's an excellent point, George. It kind of goes without saying, and it's perplexing. I know it's very perplexing because they're supposed to have been there from the beginning in favor of a two-state solution. And I'll go back even further to the UNGA Resolution 181. So that's what the Israelis cite as the basis of the creation of Israel. Well, what they don't tell you is that UNGA 181 stipulates three conditions. It doesn't just say there can be an Israel. It says that there's an Israeli state for Jews, and there's a Palestinian state for Arabs. And there's also Jerusalem as a corpus separatum, which is a separate body in Latin, basically meaning that it will be sort of a capital because of its importance for all three religions, basically, but also that it wouldn't belong to one party or the other. The point is that the Israelis have never respected those other two conditions. They illegally annexed Jerusalem, and they've never allowed a Palestinian state to materialize. And even when they did have the Oslo Accords, I mean, they went on to kill Arafat. They went on to keep building illegal settlements in the West Bank, even putting illegal football clubs there. Everything, frankly, that belongs to the Israeli state, even from a football club to a settlement, is illegal in the West Bank, and they just keep on building them and expanding them and increasing them, their presence in numbers. You've had hundreds of thousands of Israeli settlers move into the West Bank since the Oslo Accords. They've never been sanctioned, they've never been punished, they've never been stopped or impeded in any capacity by the UK or the US. So the whole thing is a farce, and really this kind of speaks to the whole premise of Western diplomacy in the last 30 years in general. I mean, I can point to the Minsk agreements, I can point to the 2+4 talks, the Iran nuclear deal. I mean, what is there that we haven't lied about in negotiations to the other side, whether it's the Palestinians, the Russians, or the Iranians? we don't have any more real diplomats, unfortunately. We just have worse liars and criminals in suits. That's it. There's no more diplomacy. So what they've been recognizing as a Palestinian state, would that even include Gaza? Because they've been demanding that Hamas depart from, not just disarm, but depart entirely. They don't, Keir Starmer and his French counterpart, Macron, they don't elaborate on that whatsoever. It's just some vague token that they throw out there to make it look like they're unbiased or that they're trying to resolve this. But they have no interest whatsoever in a peace process or in a Palestinian state. And they're not trying to pressure the Israelis one bit. I don't think anyone, there should be no illusions or misunderstandings about that. The Israelis don't actually feel that this is some kind of a pressure tactic. They know it's all an act. This is all calculated and coordinated and agreed upon beforehand. And again, Keir Starmer should be viewed as a full partner in crime with the Zionists. He is not an external party. He's not complicit. He is a belligerent. He has made the UK armed forces, unfortunately, a belligerent party in this genocide against the Palestinians. So again, there is just these abstract, tokens and terms that they throw out there, but they have no meaning in reality.
Finally, if you're able to, tell us what stage your own private persecution has reached. When can Richard Medhurst speak and write freely and travel freely again?
Well, George, I'm still out on bail, unconditional bail. So it's almost been a year now. So August 15th will be the 1-year anniversary of my arrest, which is wild to say that. They haven't charged me yet. The police have sent my file to the Crown Prosecution Service in May, so two months ago they sent it. And then my bail was moved to November 5th, Guy Fawkes Day, of all days. And so I'm waiting to see if Keir Starmer's Attorney General, Richard Hermer, who has family in the IDF, or dear family members serving in the IDF, as he puts it, is going to charge me. And again, that could happen tomorrow morning. It could happen on November 4th. I don't know. But my police bail date is November 5th, so I have to be back at Heathrow Police Station on November 5th. And that's unless they charge me earlier or they decide to extend it again for the 4th, 5th time. I've frankly lost count. But I have been able to travel freely, thankfully, and I just came back from Iran. I was there to report on the war. And the destruction I saw was frankly staggering. So I'm going to be publishing a documentary film on that quite soon. I filmed a lot of good footage there, and I was privileged to be welcomed there as a foreign British journalist during wartime, and also to do all these interviews and go around reporting. So I'm trying my best to work as normal despite the circumstances.
Richard Medhurst there, who has been cleared of all suspicion of involvement in terrorism in his own country, in the UK, but his own country, the UK, has tossed the ball to the Austrian authorities. So Richard, not yet entirely in the clear. How should I even have to speak like this? He's a journalist, for God's sake. Now, as the Gaza story developed and the blood flowed and the fire and suffering continued, I spoke to another brave whistleblower. They all come out, The truth will never remain hidden for long, because in the human spirit there are people who are determined that the truth shall be told. One of them is Dr. Anelle Rodriguez Sheline, a former State Department official in the Biden administration, now at the Quincy Institute. She stood up and paid for it over the genocide in Gaza, and she spoke to me about why she did so. Watch this.
It's really unclear at this point. I think what's important to keep in mind is that Trump knows how to get Netanyahu to listen to him, because he was able to do it in January. He achieved that ceasefire. And my understanding of how he did that was he threatened the American weapons and the vast amounts of money that the United States sends to Israel every year. So clearly Trump knows how to get what he wants. It's just not yet clear if he was willing to threaten Netanyahu with that kind of measure this time, because thus far, I like everyone, initially was waiting to see if perhaps we were going to have an end to Israeli bombs murdering Gazan babies, Palestinian babies in Gaza. And obviously that has not yet happened. The reports are that there are teams of negotiators. The Israeli team, including Ron Dermer, are supposed to meet tomorrow to hammer out the details, I suppose. But as you have mentioned, and as others have noted, Trump said on Truth Social that Netanyahu needs to stop bombing, and he has not done so. And then, as you pointed out, he removed that post. And so thus far, it does not appear as if Trump threatened the supply of American weapons, or if he did so, it doesn't seem as if Netanyahu is taking that seriously.
There's the usual trail and from the usual suspects that Trump is furious with Netanyahu. He's swearing at him. Why do you always have to be so effing negative? This is a win. Take it. All kinds of vernacular being deployed. The question is, I never know whether to believe it, because in the past it has turned out to be false. But we can only count the bombs. 93 separate air raids took place on Gaza, on people in tents, on people in the rubble, on people in United Nations schools, just in the last 24 hours. 100 were killed, God knows how many murdered and mutilated. Makes you wonder if Netanyahu is really all that keen on getting these hostages back at all.
I'm so tired of that talking point, because I don't know how anyone continues to find it credible. Because, I mean, this is part of, in the response from the Hamas officials that was sent on Friday, where I think they were being quite strategic in that they agreed to release hostages, and which is, again, something that they have been willing to do for months. Even as early as November 2023, they offered to give back all of the hostages in exchange for a real lasting ceasefire and an end to the bombardment, and allowing in aid again. And Israel was uninterested in doing so. And so the fact that there has continued to be this narrative that, well, if they just gave back the hostages, Israel could stop bombing, I just don't understand who is still buying this. And I mean, again, it is like so many things. I think when you have sort of motivated reasoning, or you have someone who is only interested in sort of understanding things from one perspective, then they're unwilling to sort of accept the reality of what's going on here. But it is. I don't understand how that line continues to work, because you do still have people saying things like this, that, well, that if Hamas just gave back the hostages, why don't they just give back the hostages? And it's just like, well, they have been trying to do that. So many times they have tried to do that, and every time they try, Israel changes the terms of the agreement and says, no, we're just going to keep bombing. And it should be so abundantly clear to everyone that Israel's intention is to kill as many people as possible in Gaza in order to get the rest to leave, as you were saying earlier, in order to take over this territory here. This is a land dispute. And the fact that Israel continues to use the justification of hostages just demonstrates how useful it is to have the hostages there. I think they understand that is kind of, to the extent that anyone still believes anything they say, this line about if Hamas just gave back the hostages, well, as soon as Hamas does that, then everyone's going to say, well, why, like, Israel, how do you justify the fact that you're continuing to bomb, which is why Israel does not want the hostages back?
Of course, I mean, there's a lot of sheep in the world, Doctor. It doesn't take many sheepdogs to corral a lot of sheep. Even the very nomenclature here, the Israelis are hostages. What are the 10,000 Palestinian prisoners? Exactly. Are they hostages? Why are they prisoners, captives, when the Israelis are hostages? Israel has said they will give back, they will release the women and children that they hold. Who knew Israel was holding women and children? How is that possible? How is that legal? Let's talk about the flotilla, because I'm keen to take advantage of your qualification, your expertise. Just confirm for us, will you, that seizing a ship in international waters is in itself unlawful. Then to remove people from those ships and hold them in prison is unlawful. And it goes without saying, to torture, mistreat, maltreat, force prisoners to kiss your flag, take pictures of them doing so, and so on. All of this is a multiple criminal indictment we're looking at here.
That is absolutely true, but I think none of that is surprising given what we know the Israeli government is capable of. What I have been shocked by is the fact that there are Americans held and U.S. officials have done essentially nothing. You are starting to hear a few American politicians stepping up. So, for example, David Adler is, I believe, the only Jewish, or one of the only individuals on board the flotilla who's Jewish. He's an American citizen. His representatives, the senators from California, Adam Schiff and Alex Padilla, have said nothing. Nothing. And so instead you have the senator from Maryland, Van Hollen, talking about this. You have Ro Khanna, who's a House representative from California, although I don't believe he's actually David's particular House representative. They're stepping up and calling for his members of Congress to do something about the fact that he is still being held in horrific conditions, I'm sure, inside of Israel. The fact that Israel is mistreating prisoners, we know they routinely starve and murder Palestinian prisoners every day. However, the fact that even Democratic senators and members of Congress who ostensibly could get a political win out of this, the fact that for so many Americans, but in particular Democrats, no longer support unconditional support to Israel, this could be a way for them to show, hey, maybe in the past I wasn't willing to criticize Israel, but now when they have an American and they are torturing him, or at the very least severely mistreating him and not releasing him and not allowing him to speak with his family or his lawyers, even just for a purely cynical political point, this could be wise for them to do, even if, they personally may not care. But this is where the country is going politically. And so many Democrats continue to be on the AIPAC payroll, continue to accept money from the Israel lobby, continue to kiss the ring, and even when it hurts them politically, which again is fairly shocking, because generally you can count on politicians to do what makes the most sense for them to try to win their next election.
Indeed. That means they're bought and paid for, Doctor, and that they cannot. Trust me, I was a member of Parliament across 5 different decades, 7 times. And I'm here to tell you, and I don't think American politicians are different, most politicians care only about continuing to be politicians. It's a good job, good pay, no heavy lifting. You can wear a clean shirt and still be clean at the end of the day. You get sired or madamed everywhere you go. And in the American case, you're likely to read the stock market better than any pundit will ever do. And you'll leave 10 times,
I was going to make that point, certainly.
Richer.
In the U.S. system, you have a lot of opportunities
richer.
to become wealthy as a politician or a member of Congress.
So that, I mean, it's got to be cash or compromise, isn't it? These people have been captured by cash, which is, of course, a form of compromise, because you've got the video of it being handed over, or other kinds of compromise. It's the only thing that explains the conduct of politicians a conduct which is diametrically opposed to their own interest. No politician acts against their own interest unless they have no choice.
Well, and I think it does just speak to the ways in which our politics are so captured. And so even though from the perspective of, in a functioning democracy, they would need to pay closer attention to where voters are on these issues, they can trust that in our deeply compromised political system, as long as they continue to abide by the AIPAC talking points, then the checks will keep flowing, and they're more likely to hang on to their seats or win their next election that way with an abundance of resources than they are by actually adopting policies that appeal to their constituents. And this so many people here. And I don't know to what extent this is kind of relevant to your audience, but so many Americans keep wringing their hands about the Democrats being so ineffective in the face of Trump's fascism. And I think it's very difficult to be an effective politician when your interests are best served by serving the billionaire class that both parties are so in league with. So it is.
Checks don't always work, though, Doctor, do they? I mean, Thomas Massey, they have moved heaven and earth to destroy him, and my guess is he's going to win handsomely. Marjorie Taylor Greene, these are two people from Trump's own base. Marjorie Taylor Greene is openly saying to AIPAC and the lobby, if you want to have a go, come on. You won't beat me in Georgia. And my guess is that they would not. So it's a sort of diminishing asset, the AIPAC check and the AIPAC endorsement. The day will come, will it not, where the AIPAC endorsement will be a toxic one indeed.
I think that day is coming, although it's not coming soon enough. And unfortunately, although you do have some very brave people like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Thomas Massey, there are still far too few. And in particular, though, they are, I think someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene in particular knows that there's this incompatibility between an America First agenda and an Israel First agenda. And to the extent, to go back to what we were talking about earlier, to the extent that Trump recognizes that it's going to be more and more difficult to maintain this facade of so-called America First, when in fact it is so evident that your foreign policy is absolutely about putting Israel first, as was the case with Biden, as has long been the case in American politics. But when your whole brand is America First, it makes it much harder to explain. And I do think Trump is well aware of this. However, unfortunately, whether it's just Marjorie Taylor Greene or Thomas Massey, who Trump has come out very explicitly against, whereas thus far I think Marjorie Taylor Greene has been able to sort of keep on Trump's side on other issues and has not necessarily criticized him as directly. I think she is kind of walking a very narrow path, and we'll see how much longer she's able to maintain that. But again, I think because she is speaking to many people who voted for Trump who don't understand how this policy could be interpreted as in any way America First.
Quite so. Because of my profession and also my age, I can tell you that Trump's main thought now will be his legacy. It will be, have I left the Republican Party in my own image? Have I left it in such a way that my children, my allies, my friends will be able to inherit and meaningfully have a chance of being elected, have a chance of carrying on my agenda. But more and more, I'm thinking that Trump is throwing it all away. And it's difficult for me to conclude other than that he's doing so because he has no choice. I think he's been Epsteined. What do you think?
Certainly looks that way, doesn't it? And there's certainly an abundance of evidence that the two were quite close. And we know that Israel has done things like this in the past, including with Bill Clinton. I don't have access to any particular information, beyond what everyone else has. But it certainly does seem that whether it's Epstein or something, that Israel seems to have something on Trump, because he was willing in January to get the ceasefire, which again was just to show that he could do what Biden couldn't or really wouldn't do, achieve that ceasefire. And subsequently, Trump has not been willing to exert that same pressure again. And so the question does then become, what is it that Israel has on him, given that this is fracturing his base? And as you say, really throwing his legacy into question, although there are certainly plenty of Republicans that are already wearing Trump 2028 t-shirts. I think they're concerned that would just be his own mortality.
Well, that might be some they've got in mind. But lastly, you mentioned Biden, and by extension the Democrats. Nature abhors a vacuum. Surely this is the minute for somebody on the Democratic Party's side to step forward with a wholly different policy towards. I mean, if I was in America, that's definitely what I'd be doing. I'd be saying, this is entirely the wrong road that we are on. Here's the road we now need to take to get ourselves out of this. And I'd be stomping the country, seeking the nomination. So why has that not happened? Or might it yet?
I certainly hope it will. The excitement over Zohran Mamdani as the mayoral candidate for New York City, that's something the entire country is paying attention to, and progressives certainly see him and someone in that mold as the hoped for future of the party. I had friends who just named their baby Zohran. People are really excited about this possibility. But again, he's thus far, the Democratic establishment has been largely unwilling to endorse him. I think these old habits die hard. Sorry, you can hear my dog in the background. And again, I fear that what AIPAC and what the Israel lobby has been able to accomplish is to frighten people. So the fact that you had them primary Jamal Bowman and Cori Bush, get them out of their seats in Congress, although Cori Bush is going to be running again for her seat in St. Louis, and so it's possible she may be able to come back. But I think that there are probably many people in Congress who are, like you said, people just want to continue to hold their seat and are not really willing to take a stand. And so thus far, I heard you when you were saying there aren't that many artists willing to stand up for Gaza. You mentioned Eric Clapton and Roger Waters, but you are starting to see more, in particular around film, the voice of Hind Rajab, the fact that got major stars act as producers, the fact that you are increasingly hearing people, when they have a chance to speak out publicly, say something about Gaza. I do think increasingly it's now starting to be a little bit of a question kind of among myself and the other people who resigned from the Biden administration. We just put out a statement with the Huffington Post condemning the fact that you have people like Jake Sullivan or various other people from the Biden administration who say, well, when we had power, it was not yet time to condition arms to Israel. But now it is time to condition arms to Israel, which is ridiculous because there was starvation in Gaza when you were in power. There was already a genocide underway when you were in power. So don't try to pretend. And the reason they're doing this is because they see where the public sentiment is on this, and they want to launder their reputations such that they could have a place in a future Democratic administration if such a thing ever happens again. And so the point we were making in our statement is that although it is good that people who previously didn't view this as a genocide are now understanding that it is, or people that previously were more on the Israeli side are now saying, all right, well, this has gone far enough. I can no longer justify this. Like that's how you get a social movement. You need people to change their minds, and that's how we build pressure on this. But for people who were in positions of power and it directly enabled the genocide, they don't get to launder their reputations. They don't get to pretend as if they're now they have a moral compass suddenly, and that they should be permitted to have a position of power again, because they're the reason we are where we are. So I do think that while we do need to have a big tent approach to this, and as more and more people see this for what it is and pay attention and come out against it, we should welcome those people, even if we wish they had come on board sooner. But again, for people who could have done something about this and instead enabled genocide, they don't get to have a position of power again, in my opinion.
A brave whistleblower, a brave lady, and a very smart one, Dr. Anelle Rodriguez Sheline, former State Department fellow, now at the Quincy Institute, a brave lady indeed. Now, this is the mother of all talk shows on New Year's Eve, still to come. Some of our biggest and best guests of this or any year. My former compatriot, Colonel Douglas Macgregor. He reminds me of Rob Roy Macgregor. Look him up. Thiago Ávila. Scott Ritter, who talked to us all through the Iran-Israel war, the NATO-Russia war, and the carnage in Gaza, about which Sarah Wilkinson was maybe the bravest in Britain of the critics. They're all coming up after this break. Stay tuned. Full marks to you for your dogged persistence and your quiet and dignified insistence that you were right and I was wrong. I don't actually recall the clash that we had, but I would have to say that you are being proven right, and I am being proven to have hoped for things that have not transpired. Because I said all along, I repeated it 100 times, that the big enchilada, World War III, an intensification of American involvement in the Ukraine war was more likely to happen under the Democrats, under President Kamala Harris, than under a renewed President Trump. And I'll go to the stake defending that position.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Welcome back to the New Year's Eve edition of the mother of all talk shows. This is the New Year's Eve show. 2026 is only hours away. We're looking back on the second half of 2025, which was even bloodier than the first. We'll continue, of course, analysing these wars and conflicts and the big events taking place in the world in the year to come, if God spares me. The Ukraine war came very close to ending, but peace is still too far away. In his first year in office, Trump attempted to broker a deal, but it's yet, at the time of recording, it hasn't worked. Throughout the year, I spoke to my compatriot, Colonel Douglas Macgregor. Well, he's an American now, but with a name like that, he can only hail from Bonnie, Scotland. He's a retired US Army colonel. He knows everything about war and increasingly the politics of war. I spoke to him many times, but I spoke to him in October about the then imminent danger of nuclear war. Here's what he said.
Now, George, it's good to see you. I'm glad that you're walking free on the streets of Great Britain. I don't think that President Trump is in a position to solve very much of anything. Now, we can talk about some of the constraints on him, but I think what we saw happen with the trip to Budapest was he was surrounded by various people, donors, representatives, people on the Hill, making it clear that they don't want an agreement with President Putin unless it involves Russia's unilateral surrender and humiliation. And so I think President Trump decided it's better to have no agreement than a bad one, and so he stayed home. It's that simple.
This is the anniversary, it's on this day, in fact, of 1962, of the Cuban Missile Crisis. I was opining in my monologue about how afraid we all were of nuclear war at that point, averted only by the wisdom of the two concerned. If they'd listened, with all respect to your profession, to the American generals, we wouldn't be talking here now. We might have had World War III. But Kennedy was level-headed and knew that if he had followed the advice of his generals, that it would lead to nuclear war. And I just don't think that people appreciate how close we are to nuclear war today. The British just landed Storm Shadow missiles deep inside Russia. Russia is now within its rights to retaliate against Britain, which is itself a nuclear power, and which is itself a part of a bigger nuclear alliance. These are very, very dangerous times, Colonel.
Oh, they are. There's no question about it. The problem in the West is very simple. We have absolutely, continually, grossly underestimated Russian military power. We have ignored anything that the Russian leadership has said for at least 2 decades. Whenever they have made a plea for understanding their position vis-a-vis NATO, why they did not want NATO on their borders, why they would react strongly against such action, we simply refuse to listen. And right now, I think President Trump privately would like to see an end to this, but President Trump is unwilling to do what is required to end the conflict, and that is to admit a couple of things. First of all, President Biden's decision to build up the Ukrainian military for a major war against Russia was a serious mistake. Not only a mistake, it was a strategic error. President Trump knows that to be the case, but for some reason he's reluctant to say that. And again, I blame this on his donors. And so he's decided that since he cannot formally disengage from the conflict in Ukraine, he's going to simply turn away from it. The problem is he cannot abdicate his responsibility as the leader of NATO to the Europeans because of what you have just described. The leadership in London, in Paris, in Berlin, and I would argue Warsaw, is irresponsible. They don't know what they're doing. They're playing a very dangerous game. They are pushing harder than ever against the Russians. It is only President Putin's determination to avoid a war with NATO and the United States that keeps it from growing much worse. Now, I don't know what the future holds, but I think that President Trump, as I said, would like to turn away from it and focus elsewhere, primarily the Middle East, where I think he believes the ceasefire is meaningful. I think it's an illusion, and nothing has fundamentally changed in the Middle East. But he believes that for the moment. And at the same time, he's turning his attention to Venezuela, thinking that he can simply ignore what happens in Eastern Europe. I don't think he can, and I agree with you. What the British have just done, which is not new, they've done these things in the past, is very, very dangerous. But again, Putin is the adult in the room. The people in London, Paris, and Berlin and Warsaw cannot be characterized as adults because if they were, they would not do these things. It makes no sense.
But if can only do these things based on, and this is the conundrum that you're describing, it's only the guarantee that makes NATO meaningful at all. Britain has no army, has no navy. Its navy is stuck together by glue, and its army, if you take out all the clerks and haters and medics and the rest, would be scarcely over 40,000 strong. The same with the armies on the European mainland. They cannot go to war with Russia and can only threaten war with Russia on the premise the United States would have to. Trump, I agree with you. I think Trump wants this war to end. The barking chihuahuas and poodles and dachshunds in Europe very definitely don't. But if Trump doesn't break with them and put his foot down, this is going to go on and potentially get worse and worse, isn't it?
I agree with you, unless you remove the people who are governing in London, Paris, and Berlin in particular. And I think it's reaching the point in all three countries where the population genuinely needs to do that. They need to demand change in government. Now, in the meantime, sadly, I think President Trump is demonstrating that he is very much a politician, contrary to what he wants everybody to think, because he wants to be a little bit pregnant. He doesn't really want to bring the child to fruition and take responsibility for it, but he'd like to be pregnant. In other words, he wants to be popular with everyone, he wants to get along with everyone, and he doesn't understand exactly what you described. He is the de facto leader of NATO. And if they want to break with him by insisting on carrying on this war, then he should put them in that position. Because there's no reason for us to keep 100,000 U.S. troops from Lithuania to Romania sitting around, training from time to time, eating lots of food and costing lots of money. They are not going to march into Ukraine. They are not going to fight Russia. That's quite clear. So he ought to get them out and bring them home and be done with it. But he's reluctant to take that decision. And remember, again, he's not someone who studies the issues. He doesn't really understand the roots of the war in Ukraine. I don't think he really cares. I think he thinks it's a bad thing and would like to end it. But unless you understand why it happened to begin with, how can you end it in a way that makes sense? The Russians want to settle this thing. They want a new security arrangement for Europe. It makes infinite sense. We should have had that 20, 30 years ago. But instead of pressing ahead with that, he's backed away. You can't do that, but that's exactly what he's done. It's like having no one in the locomotive, and the locomotive is headed down the tracks at high speed. It's not a good answer.
What's the reason for these people that crowded round Trump and let it be known in no uncertain terms that they did not want peace? Is it, as Tucker Carlson has been saying, that this has been a money laundering operation, that not just the military-industrial complex, but the politicians themselves have enriched themselves with corrupt practices with all these billions, tens, scores of billions of dollars washing around unaudited?
The great Lou Dobbs once said that America has the best government money can buy. And I think we know that to be the case. We're currently governed by a collection of billionaires. You can call them oligarchs, whatever you like. And President Trump has demonstrated routinely since he took office that his administration is, quote unquote, a very transactional administration. You would like to be the ambassador to Lower Slobovia, pay your $2 million to me, and you get to be the ambassador to Lower Slobovia. Tell me what you want, and if you pay enough money, I'll see to it that you get it. That's effectively what's been going on. And these billionaires are the same ones that want to subjugate the Middle East. They want to create Israeli hegemony backed by U.S. military power all over the region. They want the same thing in Ukraine. They want to destroy Russia. Why these people are committed to these things would take us an hour to explore. But the point is, the same people pushing these bad wars and bad policies are at work in Venezuela. They're at work in the Middle East. They're at work in Eastern Europe. There's no easy way to get around it. And President Trump's problem is he owes his position in the White House to these people.
Yeah, but he is there and he can't run again. So, eaten bread is soon forgotten, as the Irish say. It's a bit of a puzzle that he's not more interested in what his legacy will be. I mean, if you could leave office as the guy who halted the potential for World War III in Europe, that would be a very considerable feather in your cap.
But he is preeminently concerned about optics. the way things look. And he believes that if he states it, it's true. If he tells someone to do something, he believes they're off and doing it. My experience with him was that he doesn't realize that simply because he tells somebody to do something, they may or may not do it. And if they don't do it, he doesn't hold anybody accountable. There's no price to be paid. You can't run a government that way. You can't run anything that way. Where there is no accountability, there's no performance. He doesn't seem to understand that. But he wants to feel good. He likes others around him to feel good. His favorite thing is to be on permanent campaign. He loves to talk to large audiences and interact with them. What he doesn't like to do is sit down, listen to a detailed briefing of some importance. Now, there is some good news. It looks like he was briefed on the Tomahawk, its limitations, the small numbers available, the problems with it. And he finally decided, well, perhaps I shouldn't press ahead with that. Everybody thinks it's because President Putin told him that this would sour Russian-American relations, and it was viewed in Moscow as an escalation in the conflict, and they would have to respond. But I don't think that was it. I think he was rather surprised when he discovered we don't have that many, and the ones that we have are only available to be launched from the ground for the Ukrainians. And if we do that, we have to put our soldiers, our personnel, if you will, on the ground, executing the mission, planning it, and so forth. I think he finally decided this is a bad idea. Well, that's a good thing. I'm damn glad he decided that, because it was a very stupid idea. But that's not enough. And when President Putin talks to him, President Putin likes to think of him as the leader of NATO. And he's very frustrated because he can't do that, because there's no evidence that President Trump will put his foot down. Just as there's very little evidence that he's going to do anything to restrain Mr. Netanyahu, we don't see much evidence he's going to restrain Starmer or Macron or Merz. But he should, given his position. But he doesn't do it.
I was in Moscow briefly on my way to China, 24 hours or so. There's a lot of what you might call Trump-supporting Americans there, a considerable number, in fact. I won't embarrass them by adumbrating, but the signs are that Trump really does want to improve relations with Russia. It's perfectly possible to imagine sanctions on Russia being lifted in America before anywhere else. It's perfectly possible to imagine RT being back on the air in America while still being banned in Europe. These are strange times, Colonel.
Listen, George, President Trump wanted to normalize relations with Russia. He sent a team to Saudi Arabia shortly after he was elected, and they had good meetings in Saudi Arabia. The opportunity to normalize relations with Russia is there. Now, I don't know how much longer that's going to last if things get worse in Ukraine, which I'm afraid at this point they may. So I agree with you 100%. The problem for President Trump is this. He was elected preeminently to restore economic productivity and prosperity at home in the United States. That's what everyone that voted for him wants. That hasn't changed. No one voted for an invasion of Venezuela. No one voted for extending the war in Ukraine. And no one is interested in fighting Israel's war of conquest in the Middle East. That's all nonsense. So where is the disconnect? The disconnect is back to where we started. Money. Everything's about money and power. Money breeds power and influence. He's made promises to get where he is. He's trying to deliver, and it's disastrous for him. He needs to stand up and say, I'm the president of the United States. I have obligations to the American people. This is what I promised. I've got to deliver. Well, that would require him to shed his overseas commitments completely. He would be compelled to sign off on the best deal that he could get for the Ukrainians. He would be compelled to tell Mr. Netanyahu, I can't support your genocidal practices in Gaza or the West Bank or anywhere else. And by the way, whatever is wrong in Venezuela, I'm perfectly willing to deal with Maduro. Maduro has offered us a stake in his oil and gas industries, and I'm going to take it. That's what he would do. He's obviously not a free agent.
Colonel Douglas Macgregor there, retired U.S. Army colonel and superb voice of clarity and wisdom on the wars swirling around the world here on the Mother of All Talk Shows. Next, as Gaza was pounded by Israeli bombs, there was an attempt, in fact several, and it's been a ceaseless struggle by brave people all around the world to try and get humanitarian aid into the stricken Gaza Strip by freedom flotillas. One of the convoys was a flotilla of boats, and on board was Thiago Ávila, who became famous throughout the world as the dignified face and voice of the free people of the world. The Brazilian activist was on the good ship Madeleine. We finally managed to get a mobile phone connection to his boat, and we spoke to him back in September about his mission. Watch this.
Thank you so much, George, for having me here. It's actually an honor being with you. You do such an important work. And it's a privilege to be here with your audience as well. So dedicated and so sensitive to the Palestinian cause. I'm actually here at the boarding place of one of our missions. We have now the biggest solidarity mission ever. And the strategic goal is what you said. First of all, is to try to break this illegal siege of 18 years over Gaza and be in support and solidarity with the Palestinian people who had been suffering 8 decades of genocide and ethnic cleansing. That, like you said, structured itself into an apartheid colonial state, and which is led not by a religion, but by a racist and supremacist ideology called Zionism. And our goal is to be in solidarity with the Palestinian people by trying to break this horrific siege, and even when we don't break, by showing the cruelty that it involves, and putting pressure on people so that governments can break their relations, stop the complicity, be a part of a political education process as well, to mobilize as part of this global uprising. I'm actually very proud and happy. I was in the UK, I was in London a few weeks ago mobilizing for this mission, and I was so happy because I said I'm at a place on the global north which had the biggest mobilization for Palestine. So it was an honor being there with all of you. And I said, the demonstrations that you did in London and the demonstrations that happened in Amman and in Baghdad and many countries that went over millions, these are also part of the same strategy. The demonstrations, the boycott, the flotillas, all of the actions that we try to do, the land convoys is part of the same goal, to be in solidarity with a people that is being suffering so much from imperialism, from Zionism. And of course, we need to continue going. The history of anti-colonial struggle is a history of persistence, that whenever the indigenous people continue to struggle for freedom, they achieve this freedom. And this comes earlier when we have international solidarity side by side. So it's our duty to be doing this. Unfortunately, George, like I said, this mission didn't have to exist. It should be governments doing this. But since they're failing, we need to do our part. We will not abandon the Palestinian people like the governments are doing. So that's why we're doing this. And the same way that you're breaking the media blockade, bringing true information, we are on the same trench here for liberation and for humanity.
Amen. The model of convoys, I did it by land when it was comparatively easy compared to your seaborne attempts. I say comparatively easy. We were brutally attacked by the Egyptian regime, and that's something that hasn't changed with the change of president. But what they do, they provide a daily story. They provide a daily narrative that people can follow, that the media that is interested, and most of them are not, but some of them are, have something new daily to report, all of which draws attention to the siege. Now, one of the most significant things you said so far is that this siege has been going on for 18 years. It didn't begin on the 7th of October. Gaza has been besieged for 18 years. I know that because I was trying to break that siege 18 years ago. Is the media following the flotillas that you are organizing?
It's very curious to see the different response from the media, George, in every mission. So the first, these are the boats number 38, because the 37th boat was the Handala that tried to break the siege and was intercepted. The Medellin mission where I was, when it got intercepted, arrested, I went to Israeli prison, to solitary confinement. It was boat number 36. And now we have dozens of boats, more than all of the other boats combined. But we are in a situation that the flotilla now has the strategic aim to break the siege and also to create a people's humanitarian corridor. So that's why pretty much why we need to continue doing this. What I always say is that imagine how many days the media is trying to change the subject and not to show about Gaza, to talk about Gaza. They talk about Gaza to save face because they've been complicit with it for almost 2 years. So they say the minimum necessary, but always saying people died, not people have been killed by Israel. Sometimes they omit who made the offense, who did the offense, who did the crime, and many of the times they just want to talk about something else. So our mission is pretty much the same. All the 37 boats, Netanyahu himself will say, those are Hamas terrorists bringing weapons to attack Israel. But the last two missions, they were so easy to understand that this was lies, and we live such a different moment where the Hasbara and the ideological lies and manipulation of the Zionists, they are not having the same effect as before, that he could not pull this up. So he changed the narrative. He tried to say it's a selfie boat. People are doing that to show up, which was already a victory for us, because we need to remember that 4 months ago they bombed our boat in Malta. So they had to go from bombing a boat to a different strategy of intercepting a boat without using violence to pretend that they were not crew. And this was also because the media was already covering the mission, but they are never very fair. Most of the time they focus on the participants. They will say, we are not the story. The story are the Palestinian people. Any risk that we undertake on this mission is but a fraction of the risk that the Palestinian people go through every single day. And yes, of course, it demands courage, like you said, George, but what about being a Palestinian and living 8 decades of genocide? How much courage does it demand to go to look for aid in a besieged Gaza for almost 2 years? That is real courage. When you look at the Palestinian doctors, there are the nurses, the medical workers, the civil defense units, that's our model and inspiration. They're leading the way. So the media sometimes, they distort our mission to reproduce the Zionist lie, to say it's selfie vote or stuff like that. Other times they focus only on individuals, like a more liberal approach to that, and like it was not an anti-colonial struggle and anti-systemic mobilization, a direct action. And some of the times they simply don't talk about it as well. They ignore. So we have a conflictive relation with media, but of course we have independent media to say the truth.
Yes, more and more important. And their hand is weaker than it was in the Mavi Marmara case. Over a decade ago now, they murdered 10 of the people on board the Mavi Marmara. They killed them in cold blood. My parliamentary assistant at the time was one of the people arrested by these murderers and taken to Ashkelon, which I presume was the jail that you were in. When they took you to that prison, did the Brazilian government do anything to get you free? I know that the American government did nothing to get Mr. Smalls out, and he suffered racist abuse and brutality.
Yeah, we have a degree of diplomatic support on our mission that we see that the Global South countries are usually a bit more dedicated to attend to their participants on our mission. And some of the Global North countries that are more supportive of the Palestinian cause, the ones that recognize the Palestinian state as well. But the other ones that are highly complicit, to be honest, they really don't care. So the U.S. authorities, they completely abandoned all of our participants, especially Chris, under that horrible racist case of abuse and violence, but all the other participants as well. So we had a situation that I was taken to solitary confinement because I was on a hunger and thirst strike, and because I was the coordinator, one of the organizers of the mission as well. So when I was there, they said I could not talk to any diplomatic envoy or anything else, but the Brazilian government was trying, as well as the Palestinian advocates, the lawyer, the attorneys that were there trying to get us out of there as soon as they could. So we see an effort, but when we look at the complicit countries, unfortunately, they completely abandon people, the same way that they still have the courage to send bombs or to provide diplomatic cover to the Zionist regime.
Now, the tactic has been a very good tactic to get high-profile people on these voyages, which is not easy. Not easy to get people of advanced years, not easy to get people that can leave their work for weeks to do this. Not easy to get people who can bear the depredations of a boat trip. It's not exactly a cruise liner that you're on. Are you running out in any way of well-known volunteers, or have you got any up your sleeve for the next one?
Actually, now, George, we are at the eve of the biggest solidarity mission ever attempted since the horrific siege started. So imagine, we have more boats than all the other boats combined. We have more participants than all the other participants combined. And we have more parliamentarians confirmed, for example, than all the other missions combined as well. So we are going on a very, very strong mission right now, because and it's not even because we want, but it's because the situation in the ground, the full invasion of Gaza City, the complete destruction of all lifeline in Gaza demands us to do that. The sense of urgency needs to be the highest for any human being on this planet. So people are aware. We have a social majority in a planet of 8 billion people that knows that starving children to death is wrong, bombing hospitals, schools, shelters, but they don't see that they have the means to change stuff because they don't control the nation states, the government, the complicit governments. So right now we're calling on a global rise up, that we need to not only go on the boat missions, but we need to mobilize in the streets, because now is the decisive moment for the Palestinian people. So that's why we have such a huge mission. It's not because we want it. To be honest, we wanted all people to be able to live fair and free and equal, and we didn't have to mobilize for this. We all have families. I'm a father of a 2-year-old baby daughter. I wish I was home. But how can I go home knowing that other 2-year-olds are starving to death? Right here, with the whole world watching, in the first televised genocide of human history. So we need to mobilize, our duty to do so.
Amen to that. How can people support your work, Thiago? How do they contact you?
Thank you, George. To support the mission, you go to globalsumutflotilla.org or follow our social media pages, Global Sumut Flotilla. There you'll see a lot of call to action. To go to demonstrations while we are at sea, to demand and pressure the governments for a safe passage, to spread the word as well, so the algorithms of this horrible big techs will not be able to silence us as well. Visibility for our mission means safety. The most visible we are, the less likely is for Israel to pay the political cost of killing all of us, which of course is what they would like to do. But if they don't have the capacity to pay this political cost, they will have to deal with it in a different way. And we want to be so big and so organized and put so much pressure that the only thing that they can do is not to intervene and stay out of our way for us to get to Gaza, which is what the International Court of Justice demands that they do. They don't stop any humanitarian mission to Gaza, and we finally can create a humanitarian corridor. So we are not counting only on the boat mission, George. Now we're counting on you. We're counting on everyone who is online, everyone who's on the streets. We need to do this together. The boats are not more important than the land work, than the media work. We all, as humanity, we need to move right now.
Thiago Ávila, brave Brazilian activist. His flotilla may eventually have been stopped, but it was not in vain. His efforts will never be forgotten. Now, in the month of October, Gayatri and I had that awful experience that I described to you earlier. And one of the things that the armed anti-terrorist police were interested in was how come Gayatri had a Palestinian flag on her fingernail. More about that later. But one woman who suffered more than anybody else in Britain, I award her the title of the bravest British voice for Palestine, was Sarah Wilkinson. She has been constantly in trouble with the British authorities as they march full scale, full tilt, at double speed towards tyranny. Sarah Wilkinson returned from that aforementioned flotilla, trying to bring nappies and baby formula to mothers in Gaza. It earned her not a trip to the palace for an award, but yet another huckle from the so-called counter-terrorism police. I spoke to her on MOATS and asked her what that experience had done to her. Watch this.
Thank you so much for having me on the show. I'm so sorry that your wife has been so badly affected, because you're right, no one is exempt anymore, and it affects us all in different ways. and hopefully we can all gather together and support each other through these horrible times. Yeah, it was very peculiar to come back from Turkey, who had essentially rescued us, given us medication, doctors, hospitals, full use actually of any hospital department that we wanted. But not only that, they'd put us up in a hotel, they'd sent government officials to make sure we were okay. We had police guards who actually would even just take us to the shops if we asked them to. So yeah, I'm really hesitant to use the word we were treated as heroes. I'm gonna put it in inverted commas, but we were, and you know, we were welcomed by crowds. In fact, thousands of people turned up, and so we go from that to choosing which flight we wanted to come home on, and I needed to return to surrender for my bail, so I had to discharge myself from hospital in Turkey. I could have stayed there for another 2 weeks and I would have been given all of the treatment that I needed. And there is this question over radiation poisoning, because Ketziot or Negev jail is notoriously known for having being radioactively contaminated, and indeed they checked us with Geiger counters on our way out, well, some of us. So to go from that, and you return to Britain, and you get off the aeroplane, and your passport just doesn't work, and you are then picked up by border guards quite roughly. It was quite an aggressive arrest, and put in another pen. An immigration pen, where there were people desperately trying to get into the country. So, of course, I gave this speech to people saying, why do you want to come to Britain? It's bloody awful here. You know, they arrest British citizens just for returning home. And then suddenly these 9 police plainclothes again, turned up, and it was an extremely aggressive arrest in a very, very public place. This is Heathrow Airport. It's one of the busiest, and it was a very busy time for flights to come in. So it's absolutely full of people, and I don't have anything on except these medical scrubs, which were given to me in the hospital because I'd been so ill. I'd managed to get through 2 sets of clothing. So the hospital had very kindly given me their medical scrubs. So I came back looking like a volunteer doctor, to be honest with you. And I was kind of joking about, I'm quite proud of these medical scrubs. You know, people think I've been a medic in Gaza and I've been doing all this amazing volunteer work, when suddenly I'm being searched. And because I haven't got anything on underneath, because the Israelis have had absolutely every item of underwear that I've probably ever owned, so they're sort of searching me and it's quite obvious that I haven't got anything on underneath, because they're pulling my trousers and they're pulling my top up, and so I'm naked underneath. This is British police, so I was moaning an awful lot about it, and then the handcuffs were attached to me so tightly that it was completely unnecessary. I'm non-violent. I've been on a flotilla to deliver humanitarian aid, so I consider myself as doing something good, not doing something criminal, and I'm being dragged literally because I couldn't walk fast enough for these police down these stairs and round the backside entrance and down some more stairs into a police van, which is probably half the size of my own toilet. It was tiny, and they wouldn't take the handcuffs off. So then you can't sit back. So as soon as this van set off, you know, I'm being thrown around in this van, and I ended up having to squeeze onto the floor, because otherwise, you know, I was going to end up with a head injury. And that's how Britain treats you. And it's kind of strange. I kind of came from the hullabaloo of Turkey, who had treated me with such respect. We weren't very well after coming out of Israeli custody. Many of us were very, very poorly. Some people had passed out. We were feeling sick and nauseous. We couldn't keep food down, but we were treated with such respect. And to go then straight into the hands of the British police, who treated me as if I had murdered somebody. And then driven all the way, and it's a long way from London to my local police station. They refused to take the handcuffs off. So you can't even sit properly in a car seat. I was transferred to a car sort of halfway, and they refused to take the handcuffs off because I was a danger. And it's astonishing. And I was astonished, and I don't really know what to say about it, apart from the fact I was absolutely shocked. I did know that it was likely that they might arrest me. I thought it might be that they would come on the plane like Richie Medhurst. And because that hadn't happened, I think I sort of relaxed. I didn't say goodbye to my colleagues properly who went through passport control without a problem. And I wish I had done. Really, that was the most upsetting thing, was I hadn't been able to give people a hug who had really, really supported me and really helped me through being ill as well, and flying home feeling unwell, and just being, you know, a really solid support for me. And I couldn't even say goodbye to them, but neither could I tell anybody where I was, because I was refused my phone call. When I got to the station, it's 2:30 in the morning. So they said, oh, you can't ring your lawyers. It's 2:30, so you can't have your phone call. And actually that isn't even legal, just because it's 2:30. I mean, that's not really my fault. So I ended up being given a plastic bag to be sick in because I wasn't well, while they were charging me with these 5 counts of terrorism. Or 5 counts of supporting Palestine, as I might prefer to say, because that's what it is. You know, and also 1 for not giving out my PIN number of my phone, which I couldn't do because I didn't have the PIN number on me, and it was written down. And when they arrested me, I didn't take it, so I didn't know it. So they've charged me for that as well, which is the 5th charge. Now, the thing is with these charges is, even if you get a lenient judge who kind of sees a little bit of your side of it, the minimum sentence for the majority of these charges is 10 years. So even with a lenient judge who might say, okay, well, I'm going to let you off that, but I'm not going to let you off this, or even if he gives me the smallest amount, it has to be 10 years. It's a minimum sentence. So I might not get 14 years or 21 years, but I will always get 10 unless I completely win all 5 charges, which is quite a task. You've got a jury. You've got to, you know, you've got to speak to the jury. They've got to be unanimous. It is very difficult to win all 5 charges. I might win 4, and 1 is I'm not so successful, but that's a minimum sentence of 10 years. So that is quite a frightening prospect for simply posting articles about Gaza on a very, very regular basis. And I will accept that, you know, 30 to 50 posts per day. But out of 70,000 posts, they've picked out 4 posts. Sorry, I'm so used to calling Twitter, not X. It's 4 posts out of 70,000. And I think that is a bit like saying to a heart surgeon, after 17 hours of successful heart surgery, you yawned once, so we're going to sack you. It's a little bit like that for me, because out of 70,000 tweets, they've managed to pick out 4. And one of them is deleted. One of them never made it into the public domain, but it's in this open source data. So it's not even available for public viewing, and I deleted it straight away. But I'm even being charged for that one, which nobody has seen at all. It's ridiculous, and it's hard work, and I do understand all the other people that have been arrested, and obviously Dr. Al-Owadin has been arrested recently, and like you say, for elderly people holding up placards. It's ridiculous. And I just hope that one by one, we can all end up being acquitted, and the police will realise they've made a horrendous mistake, or the government will realise they're on the wrong side of history, because that's exactly what this is.
I'm pretty nearly speechless, Sarah, to be honest, and I suspect that most of the audience will be too. This is just not the Britain that our forefathers fought for, fought fascism for. This is not the Britain even that existed just a few short years ago, bad though that was in respects. What you've just described to us is that you're facing potentially decades in prison for tweets. Words in the ether.
Yeah.
That's called terrorism.
Yeah,
unspeakable.
Yeah, I have relatives who died in the war. Obviously, we all do, fighting fascism, and they'd be turning in their graves if they could see what the country has turned into. And you're right, this is freedom of expression that's under attack. But even it's not even just freedom of expression. I'm reporting the news. The news comes to me via journalists. I often quote the journalists. I do read the articles, obviously. If I think the article's very good, I'll pick out a paragraph from the article as the heading. So it's not often my words. And I will only post something if it is of public interest. So I'm not going to post what I ate for dinner yesterday or what I had for breakfast. I'm going to post what's happening in Gaza. There's a genocide happening. There's hundreds of thousands of Palestinians that are starving to death under a man-made Israeli starvation campaign. And even this ceasefire is a ruse. You know, there was 92 Palestinians per day that was the last count. I think that they said on average are being killed by the Israelis. And now we are in danger of this ceasefire turning back into an incremental genocide where every single day 10 or 12 Palestinian people will be killed, but it's not as noticeable. I report that. Now I'm going to continue reporting it. And you will probably find that by the time I get into court, they will have changed the charges. They will have added new tweets to those charges because I think they realize some of them, well, maybe they're not strong enough. Maybe she might get acquitted from one. They are allowed to arbitrarily change the charges as they go on. So by the time I get into court, those 5 charges could be completely different. They could be completely different tweets altogether. So every single time I post, I put myself in a position where those tweets could be used against me at a future date. They don't have to stick to these charges. They can change them. Now, when in law and order has that been a thing? It's like this secret evidence or, you know, not providing the evidence so you can't defend yourself. I can't really put a case together if by the time I go to court, the posts that they're charging me for are different. So I know I'm continually having to not really work on my case because my case could change. And that is really quite stressful, but that's the point. The point is to create so much stress that you give up on the whole issue of reporting about Gaza. That is what they want. And so I'm just carrying on as I always do, but I'm aware that those 5 charges could become 10 charges as well by the time I get to court. It's completely arbitrary. This Terrorism Act it's not static. They can change it. They can play about with it. And it's an extraordinarily dangerous situation that we get into today. This is so dangerous for civil society, for journalists, for doctors even, for teachers in schools, for anyone, for parents trying to explain the Gaza situation to their children. We could all end up being arrested. Basically, you're right. Nobody now is exempt.
Extraordinary woman, Sarah Wilkinson, who continues her mission to protect and defend the innocent people in Palestine, whatever the counter-terrorism police define as terrorism. Words on paper, on Twitter, are not terrorism. We can't look back at 2025 without mentioning one of our most indefatigable commentators and guests, the one and only Scott Ritter. I have known Scott Ritter since we jointly tried to stop the war on Iraq back in 2003. We marched together, we spoke on platforms together, we did everything that we could to stop that war, and I'm only sorry that we failed. Scott Ritter, former United Nations Arms Inspector, a former intelligence officer to the US Marine Corps, has become one of the biggest and most powerful anti-war voices in the world. It was Thanksgiving. We started out by asking Scott Ritter, who's the turkey? Watch this.
I can say that the turkey that I'm going to be preparing tomorrow for my family has a better chance of walking away from my table alive than this peace plan has of of passing muster with the Russian Federation. And the turkey's already dead, so this peace plan stands no chance whatsoever. It's dead on arrival as currently configured. It was a poison pill from the start. I don't know, I not enough is known about, who came up with the original 28 points. There's talk about, ongoing back and forth between Kirill Dmitriev and Steve Witkoff. But, there's just some things in there that are just so blatantly unrealistic. A 600,000 strong Ukrainian army, they started, the special military operation started with a 260,000 strong Ukrainian military, and that included over 60,000 NATO-trained forces who were rushed towards the Donbass to invade and overrun and end the separatist republics in Lugansk and Donetsk. Today, the Ukrainian military hovers around 700,000 or so. Not only is 600,000 unrealistic, apparently the Ukrainians came back and said they want 800,000. This would make them, have not only the largest land army in Europe, but that it would double the size of the nearest competitor. So, this is just a ridiculous non-starter. The Russians made it clear in their discussions in Istanbul that they would accept about a 60,000 strong Ukrainian force. That's all Ukraine needs for legitimate self-defense. Anything larger than that, is an offensive combat force, and Russia's not going to allow that. Frozen line where Kherson and Zaporizhia and parts of the Donbass remain under Ukrainian control. No, that's just a non-starter. NATO membership, non-starter. This plan is dead. I think, trying to figure out why this plan came into being, the only logical thing I can think of is to follow up on the conversation that Secretary of the Army Driscoll had with his Ukrainian counterparts in Kiev, where he said, "You have lost this war. You're going to lose decisively. Your only hope now is to stop the war on terms that allow you to retain something. But if you turn down a peace offer with Russia, you're going to lose everything." And right now we have a dialogue, an ongoing dialogue. Let's see how it shapes out. But the plan, in order to survive, will have to be radically different than what it currently is.
So the question, and so many times this has been the question, is this a cock-up or a conspiracy? You see, I take the view, it's unpopular in some quarters, that Donald Trump genuinely wanted to end the war in Ukraine, but that the forces ranged against him, including in his own cabinet, principally in the form of Marco Rubio, but not exclusively, part of the Republican Party, all of the Democratic Party, all of the liberal media in the US, and all of the European Union were determined to wreck it. So the question is, was it ever real? And if so, who wrecked it and why?
There are many in the establishment, Trump establishment, et cetera, who are talking about this. There are several leaks associated with leaking this 28-point peace plan is one leak. Now they're leaking a two phone conversations with Russian officials and Steve Witkoff. Somebody is basically breaking the law. The 28-point peace plan, there is some speculation that this was done either by Keith Kellogg or at the behest of Keith Kellogg as a final effort to undermine the peace effort. Keith Kellogg is, of course, the man who helped destroy the Alaska process, the Anchorage process. He also, is the guy who got Marco Rubio to take a hardline stance, and he was thriving. He got a huge medal from Zelensky, rewarding him for his service to Ukraine. This is an American, by the way, and that things were going his way until Lavrov had a phone call with Rubio. When Rubio tried to push the Kellogg talking points on Lavrov, Lavrov cut him off at the knees in a what I'm told is a very direct, blunt, uncharacteristically blunt rebuttal of the plan that Rubio was trying to push on that. And I think at that point in time, Trump realized that Kellogg was an impediment and he had to go. And I think this was Kellogg's parting gift. But it also appears that there are foreign intelligence services, more than likely the Baltic states, who have intercepted phone calls and are releasing the transcripts of these phone calls, again, at the behest of Keith Kellogg and people like him who are trying to undermine this peace process. Trump wants peace. There's no doubt about that. I'm not saying that Trump is the ideal interlocuteur for peace, but he wants peace. That's better than Biden did. But he is being stabbed in the back at every step of the way by people like Marco Rubio, Keith Kellogg, and others who are just Russophobic at their core.
So if you and I are both right, and your turkey does not rise and walk away from your table tomorrow, what happens next, Scott?
Sadly, I think what happens next is Russia is going to be compelled to win this war, void of a peace treaty. I don't see how Zelensky and the Europeans can allow Russia to be given the gift of peace. They don't want it. Look at Kelly Kalash. She's coming out and saying, it's just stupidity, to be honest. It's Russia who must disarm. It's Russia who must get rid of its defense industry. Basically they're flipping the script. They live in a fantasy world. As Secretary of Army Driscoll said, the truth is now clear and unequivocal. The Russians are winning decisively. They're destroying the Ukrainian army. Everything we've been talking about, this culminating moment, is coming to pass now. The best brigades of Ukraine are surrounded by the Russians in Kupiansk and Pokrovsk, being slaughtered as we speak. Other brigades are being surrounded in other towns which can no longer be defended. There are no reserves left worthy of the name. Ukraine doesn't have any defensive lines behind the Pokrovsk lines because the billions of dollars that were allocated to these defense were embezzled, put into the pockets of criminal people. So now the army's falling back saying, where are the trenches? Where are the fortifications? They don't exist. And what you do then, if you can't defend, the army's compelled to go into a series of counterattacks, localized counterattacks in an effort to stop the Russian momentum. But they're doing so with equipment that hasn't been hardened for battlefield. There's no anti-drone screens. There's no steel spikes. This is just raw equipment coming in from rear areas, and Russian drones are having a field day slaughtering them. This is a bloodbath, and you're going to see a rapid, decomposition of Ukrainian combat cohesion in the days to come. The Russians are going to be starting to make huge territorial gains, and once that happens, there's no reason for Russia to go to the peace table. Russia will get everything it wants through force of arms. It's over for Ukraine. It's over. This is a tragedy. This is a tragic moment for the Ukrainian people. But this is what you get when you elect somebody named Volodymyr Zelensky, who is a asset of Western intelligence doing Western government's bidding, an actor reading a script written by people who have nefarious intent when it comes to Russia.
So a lot of blood on the snow this coming winter. That will, of course, drive the warmongers in Washington and in Europe crazy. Will they be tempted? And if they were, what would the impact be to themselves intervene in the conflict?
First of all, the United States is not going to get involved. I think what we're going to see here is that President Trump is going to confront Zelensky in the near future about the absolute necessity of Ukraine making all the concessions necessary to get Russia to get on board. And Zelensky will refuse, and Trump will walk away. So America is not going to get involved. That's not only bad for Zelensky, but it's bad for Europe, because all of this talk about the coalition of the willing. Understand, the British don't have any forces worthy of the name that can be deployed to Ukraine. The French, the same thing. The Germans, nothing. There is no cohesive combat-capable force of any size that's capable of deploying to Ukraine. And if there was, they would still require the backing of the United States, which isn't going to come. So Europe will make noise, but there will be no European troops sent to Ukraine because that's a death sentence for those troops, and Europe understands that. And the United States will do nothing to support these troops if they are committed, on the volition of independent governments. This isn't a NATO decision. This is a decision made by this coalition of the willing, which is speaking for Europe. This war will end with the Russians slaughtering the Ukraine army and Europe sitting there with their tail between their legs. They don't have the money for a military. They don't have a military worthy of the name. And as I said, it's going to be a very, very bad winter and probably early spring for both Ukraine and Europe.
So again, if you and I are correct, and that Donald Trump wanted peace but couldn't get it, that means you've got a lame duck president, doesn't it? And that's before the midterms next November.
This is going to be very tricky for Donald Trump, because you're right. If he walks away from Ukraine and come the summer of 2026, the news that is being promulgated by the anti-Trump media elite is of Ukraine abandoned by the American people. Trump isn't going to look good, but he can't do the opposite, which is to say, well, I'm going to fight in Ukraine, because then people say, well, you got us involved in the very war you promised us you weren't going to get us involved in. So this is why I think the Russians understand this. They understand the political realities here. I just don't know if the Trump administration has the maturity necessary to do what's required to bring this to an end in a way that doesn't feed the narcissism of Donald Trump. And I think the Russians understand this. In the leaked recording, you hear Kirill Dmitriev and Steve Witkoff talking about stroking Trump's ego. It's all about stroking Trump's ego, making Trump out to be the big man, the strong man, the great man. How this can be done, though, is a completely different question, because there's no bending on the part of Russia. They're not going to give in on these key elements. And, if Europe and Ukraine hold the line here, what can Donald Trump do?
We've not got much time, and you're always generous with us, but none of this seems to augur well for the pirates of the Caribbean. The people who are shaping up for what I think will be a Latin Vietnam. I've got to tell you, I rewatched Platoon last night, Oliver Stone's masterpiece, which was a sanguine reminder for me of just how awful the Vietnam experience was, mainly for the Vietnamese, but in no small measure for the American people themselves and their armed forces. Are we really going to see war in Venezuela?
I don't believe so, and I'll tell you why. Because even though the number of ships and everything looks impressive on paper, they only have the ability to put 4,000 Marines on the ground. You need more, you need the Marines to seize a port facility or seize airports and then fly in additional troops, marry them up with equipment. It would require hundreds of thousands of troops just to get a foothold in Venezuela. And then we're talking about, advancing into this jungled interior. That is your analogy of Vietnam is absolutely right. It's Vietnam all over again. Instead of speaking Vietnamese, they'll speak Spanish. This is why you see Donald Trump talking about negotiations. Now, I know anybody who paid attention to what happened with Hezbollah and Iran understands the United States doesn't negotiate in good faith, and we're fully capable of committing perfidy, which is a war crime, by the way. But right now, I think Trump has been told that there is no viable military solution, that the covert option isn't mature yet, and that you don't want to go off half-cocked before midterms. Because again, if you go into the midterm election knee-deep in a war of choice in Venezuela, where your excuse, drugs, will quickly evaporate, just like the WMD excuse evaporated in Iraq, you're going to lose that election. So I think Trump is going to be looking to negotiate with Maduro to come up with sort of compromise situation, in keeping the military pressure on and buying time for the CIA to come up with, a viable plan. But I don't see the execution of a military strike taking place until after midterm elections in November, if at all.
Everlasting thanks to the great Scott Ritter for all of his service, not just here on the mother of all talk shows, but to humanity, the great and existential struggle to avoid world war. Well, look, New Year is fast approaching, and my wife looks like she's ready to bring it in with some optimism. Gayatri, I won't ask you what's rattling. Everyone knows it's your jewellery, but you're looking fabulous, I must say, ready to see in the new year.
Definitely.
How was 2025, though, for you?
Well, we started 2025 in Venezuela to celebrate the presidency re-election of Nicolas Maduro. And look where we are today in Venezuela, by the way. We then moved on, traveling to Iran. We went to a film festival in Tehran. We then moved on to Russia for the Victory Day celebration in Moscow. And we joked, why don't we finish the year traveling the countries of sanctions with North Korea? Alas, North Korea didn't make it on the list this
Not yet.
year. Not this year, but we have traveled and brought you the mother of all talk shows from across the world, really. All the way
China,
from Xinjiang,
from Iran,
all the way from Indonesia, the capital, Jakarta, as well as the dream island of Bali. And we will continue to do so in 2026 because we are now on the road.
And we're now complete. Our children have finally been able to join us, and it is indeed a joy to behold. The only thing I miss about Britain is the Premier League live, but nowadays globalization is not all bad. I can watch Manchester United suffer, stutter, struggle, and often lose anywhere
At any
in the world.
sports bar around the world, indeed.
Yeah. But it's going to be a happy new year for us with our children around us. But October was a rough month.
It was, yes. It really defined where we stand today. And we've had in today's episode, we heard the stories, the testimonies of people who suffered same fates and even worse.
Far worse.
And I ended one of our last shows saying that a former Swiss colonel was put on a sanctioned list and therefore also been limited in his mobility. So praise the Lord, we are able to at least...
I was amazed. I looked it up after you said it. I didn't know it before you said it. That he's in Brussels, but he's landlocked. He's forbidden to travel over European Union territory, so he actually cannot get home to Switzerland. How absurd is that?
Yeah.
This is a guy who lives in Brussels because he was an advisor to NATO, but because he's now speaking against the war narrative of these madmen, he's stuck in Brussels. Have you seen Brussels?
Yes, so by the grace of God, we have at least the freedom to move ourselves, but it obviously points to the greater picture and the greater danger that the West, people living in the West are facing. And
yeah, it's tyranny. It's been not a long march, it's been a short march.
Yes.
And double speed march.
Yes.
At the double, on the way to the very tyranny that we fought against in the Second World War.
Not a small matter.
Not a small matter. We'll be bringing you much more of that over the course of the year, God willing. But it remains for us to wish you and your family and your friends and all of our audience of the mother of all talk shows a very happy, peaceful and prosperous 2026. Happy New Year to each and every one of you.
And God bless you all.
Amen.